Hello and welcome to Shannon Gardens. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So in this week's video, I'm going to be refreshing the hanging baskets that I usually have beside me here and behind me in my videos. The flowers that I had in there prior have faded out, and so it's time to refresh those with some fall and winter flowers. So I wanted to take you guys with me on a recent visit that I made to a local nursery just to check out some of the violas and pansies that they had available and show you guys some of the different kinds that I ran across and the different color combinations that I ran across while I was there. So I'll share that with you guys, as well as some additional information about pansies and violas. And then we'll come back here and I'll show you what I chose and get those planted. All right, you guys, so with that, let's get to it. Okay, so here's some video that I took when I went to a local nursery not too long ago looking for violas and pansies. And I just wanted to show you guys, or give you guys an idea of just how many colors there are and color options that are available in both the pansies and violas. Now, both of these are very hardy annuals. I'm in zone 7B, 8A in Georgia, and they actually bloom fall, winter, and spring for me, and then they die in the summertime with the summer heat. However, even though these are marked as annuals, they will bloom from dropped seeds. And it's funny, I've really experienced that with the violas in particular, where I will plant containers of violas and they will have evidently dropped their seeds and will start sprouting in the ground beneath the containers. So that's always really neat to have happen. And that will even happen through the summer, which is kind of funny. I plant both of these, both in ground and in containers. They do great in both. They do like well-draining soil. They like moist soil, but not overly wet. I do find myself that violas are easier to take care of. You don't really have to deadhead them as much as you would at pansies. Not that you have to deadhead pansies, but violas just don't need as much maintenance. They have a lot of blooms and are very heat and cold tolerant and drought tolerant as well. Now, the pansies have the bigger blooms on them, and so they're a bit showier and you can see them more from a distance, whereas the violas have those small blooms. So you would need to be a little more up close to be able to really see and appreciate the violas. They do also have these cool wave pansies here. Now, that's kind of like your cool wave petunia. So if you were going to plant it in a container, it would grow, kind of drape over, and it's going to grow a bit more in a trailing habit. I don't know exactly how I feel about the cool wave pansies. I think they're really, really pretty, but then sometimes I think that they kind of look like pansies that are at the end of life and are a bit leggy. So I haven't made up my mind exactly how I feel about those pansies, but I did want to share with you guys that that's an option as well. All right, you guys, so I wanted to share what I chose to put in my hanging baskets. And for this particular planting, I actually chose an anchor plant and then chose some plants to go around it, which is a little different than sometimes what I do in the wintertime. In my hanging baskets in particular, I generally just tend to plant maybe a bed or a mix of pansies and violas, but I did something a little different this time. So the first plant that I've got here is the Dusty Miller. And just look at that cool plant. I actually chose a little bit larger of one. They had smaller ones that were less expensive, but I went with a larger one because I did want that to be more of a focal point or the anchor plant around my other plants. So I have the Dusty Miller here, and I'll just tell you guys a couple of neat points about the Dusty Miller. One of the first things that attracts me to this plant is this coloration. It's got that silvery sheen, so it's kind of a gray-green with a silvery sheen, and it almost looks like it's got some snow on it, like a dusting of snow. And being as how I am in Georgia, I don't see a lot of snow, so I gotta get some plants that actually remind me of snow in wintertime because we just don't get a lot of snow here. So I really do like the Dusty Miller for that. It also has this nice texture. It's very soft kind of texture. And with that, it has these little hairs that provide that soft texture. So the little hairs on the Dusty Miller actually reflect the light, which provides that silvery sheen. Now, with that being said, the more sun they get, the more hairs they have, and therefore the brighter that silvery sheen color is. If they are more in shade, then they tend to lose that sheen and they look more just gray-green, like maybe you can see in this leaf over here, whereas the ones on top look more silvery than the ones here on the bottom. So they do prefer more full sun, maybe part shade, but they really don't want to be in shade. Not only will they lose that color, but they'll also get leggy. So it's really recommended that it has 6+ hours of direct sun. Now, once they're established, they are drought tolerant and heat tolerant, and they're deer and rabbit resistant, which is nice as well. Now, these are generally planted as annuals. However, they are marked as perennials in zones 8 through 10, and they are marked as tender perennials in colder climates. So I am in 7B 8A, and I am hoping that this is going to be a perennial for me. We'll see how it goes. I think I'm right on the cusp there, but I have read where zones even colder than mine have had these act as perennials and come back, and they have yellow flowers, I think in the spring or summer. So I'm very interested to see if they'll last, but I'm very excited to go ahead and plant these now anyway, and we'll just see how it goes. So as far as my companion plants that I chose to go with the Dusty Miller, I was really looking at pansies and violas, and I love both of them, but I kind of use them in different areas for different reasons. I recently did a video on pansies where I planted those in my front yard and in some containers in my front area. And I like pansies in that area because you can see them more from the street. So they have that bigger bloom and you can just see them more easily from a distance rather than the violas, which have the smaller bloom. And I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here. So this one's kind of folded. We had a lot of rain overnight, so these guys are a little folded, but hopefully you'll get the idea here. So this is a pansy, and it's the bicolor there, and you can see that larger bloom. This one's called the Majestic Giant. And then, whereas we have a viola here, and that's got a smaller bloom there. So I tend to use violas where I'm viewing them more up close, like in my hanging baskets or in containers. I may use a mix of both. But I will tell you that my preference, really, the ones that I like more, generally tend to be the violas. The pansies are beautiful and they're great too, but I love the little violas. I just think that they're so cute and cheery. I don't know, there's something about the violas that I just really love. I find that these are more heat, cold, and drought tolerant, and so that's what I prefer to use generally in my hanging baskets anyway. Now, both of these plants, both the Dusty Miller and these violas, and the viola is called the Color Max Clear Purple. So that's the variety that I'm showing you guys here. And I'll show you guys these together. I thought that the purple looked so pretty with the Dusty Miller and that silvery sheen. I just really like the pairing of these. And I kind of went around the nursery and put all these different flowers together. And this is what I kept coming back to. Now, neither one of them prefer to be soggy or in boggy soil. And so I'm making sure, and I wanted to make sure to mention to you guys that generally when I'm planting in my hanging baskets in the summertime or in the springtime, I'm looking for potting soil that retains moisture, that's marked as retaining moisture, which a lot of potting soils are. However, in this case, I didn't want that for the winter time. We don't get as much sun and as much heat, and I just think that any rains or anything that comes through, the soil's already going to be wet, and I really don't want any more additional retention of that moisture. So I made sure to find potting soil that wasn't marked for retaining moisture and that it's well draining. And then of course I have my drainage holes in the bottom of those hanging baskets as well. So that's something that I did want to mention to you guys that you guys might want to take note of as well, particularly depending on your area and what your winter conditions look like. So I'll take you guys with me and get these planted and kind of set up how I wanted to look. I'm not sure if I'm going to put the Dusty Miller in the middle and do the violas around it, or if I'm going to do the Dusty Miller more in the back, because I do have a wall behind me here. So I could put the Dusty Miller in the back and then plant the violas in front of that. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, so I'll just set it up different ways and see what I like best. And then I'll also show you guys where I do have some pansies planted, both in the front yard. I mentioned that I have some planted as well, and I'll put a link to that video where I did plant those along with snapdragons in the front yard and in some of the containers, just so you can get an idea of different planting ideas, different color combinations, and how I put those together. I'll put a link to that video in the description and at the end of this video, as well as my bulb planting video where I planted some pansies and violas on top of the bulbs that I've planted in containers, so that there's a bed of flowers where the bulbs are going to rise through that. And I actually have an example of that now because I have paper whites blooming with that bed of pansies underneath. So I have a lot to show you guys. We'll get to planting these, and then I'll show you guys the pansies and violas that are planted both in ground and containers in different variations. All right, let's get to planting these. All right, you guys, so I've got my hanging basket here with my fresh potting soil that doesn't have the moisture retaining quality that so many of them have. And I've got it on this little, if y'all are wondering what this green thing is underneath it, it's a little potting mat that I actually bought for indoor planting. But I'm a pretty messy gardener, and so I thought that maybe I could use it out here too. It would be a lot easier for cleanup, so that's what I'm going to do. So I've got my Dusty Miller. Now look at this. This is one thing I wanted to point out. I don't know if I can divide this. I'm going to kind of see once I get in there. But if you look closely, I can see 3 individual plants there. So I don't know if I want to divide it. I assume that I can, but I wanted to show that to you guys. I didn't even notice that. And that's something that I usually look out for when I'm buying my plants to see if I'm getting a better bargain, if I'm getting more plants for my money. And in this case, it looks like I am. Really, the reason I chose this one compared to the other one is that it was so much bigger, it was taller, and since I was using it as a focal plant, I wanted a bigger plant and then to plant around it or in front of it. So anyway, I thought that was pretty neat. I'm just going to take these out here. All right, so here they are. So I'm thinking if I put it in the middle, I could put plants around it, but there's not going to be a whole lot of space. I could do that. We'll see. But let's see if these are easily divisible. I think they are. Yep, they are. Look at that. Okay, so this gives me options. Let's go here too. Now this would not have been true for the smaller container of Dusty Miller, but this does give me options because now I've got 3 plants here that I could kind of do independently. Honestly, I could even do one or two and then do more. Let's take a look at the one. I'm just choosing the bigger one right now and putting that in the middle and then surrounding it with the violas and see what I think about that. This is where I play a lot with my plants and really try to figure out what I like best. And it sometimes takes quite a few iterations of me going back and forth and really trying to figure out what looks best to me. So everybody's preference is a little different, and what might look best to me might not to someone else, but it's kind of just doing what looks nicest to you and what your preference is when you're planning. Oops, got a little tag here. Okay, so that's it with the middle. We've got 4 surrounding. So I can do it like this. I could plant it in the middle, which is what I'm kind of leaning toward. I could, and these will fill in some around here. Now I do have some extra pansies, but I think I'm going to stay with just the violas. I also could add a little bit more of the Dusty Miller, the ones I took off, and kind of add those in more. And then have these on either side. I don't know. That kind of looks like a stripe to me. I don't think I'm going to do that. Or we could go with the Dusty Miller in the back. So let's see how that looks. Just going to take these violas out. Oops. Okay, so let's say we have the Dusty Miller in the back here. do violas in the middle. Ooh, that's pretty too. I think I like it in the middle better. You guys tell me what you think in the comments. I think I'm going with it in the middle. So we'll take these out again and I'll get these planted and then I'll show you guys the end result. All right, you guys, so the hanging baskets are done and they're looking a little droopy because I just watered them, but I wanted to show you guys the end result. So here we have our Dusty Miller, and I just think that that silver is so pretty. And then combined with the purple of the violas, it's just absolutely beautiful. Now I think that you could pair that Dusty Miller with a lot of different colors and it would just be beautiful. But I really like the pairing with the purple here and just think that those offset each other so nicely. Now I did divide this Dusty Miller, as I showed you guys earlier. It had 3 plants in the one pot, so it was very easy for me to divide. But I did end up using all 3 in each of the hanging baskets because I just felt like it filled in the hanging basket better. I could have just used 1 or 2 and then used a different plant somewhere else, but I just like the way that it filled in here. And I think once everything grows in even more and fills in with the violas and the Dusty Miller, I think it's going to be beautiful. But that is definitely something to note when you guys are looking for your plants and looking at different plants to see, because sometimes they may have a plant that costs a little more, but it may have more than one in that container and you may be getting more for your money. I didn't realize it when I bought it at the time. I just bought it because it was a bigger plant and I wanted something with more height in these containers as a focal point. But had I bought 3 of the smaller plants, it would have cost more than the 3 that I got from this larger plant. So just something to keep in mind. So I'm very pleased with this plant. And if for nothing else, if we don't get snow this year here in Georgia, at least I've got a plant that looks like it's got a dusting of snow. So to me, that's a win-win. So now I'll show you guys a couple other ways I've planted pansies and violas, both in the ground and in containers this season. Here's a container that I mentioned earlier that I have some pansies planted in. And then above that, I've got my paper whites that are actually in bloom now. They're so pretty and smell absolutely wonderful. Now I really like this because you have these pretty pansies or violas, whichever you choose to do, planted on top of your bulbs, and then the bulbs just come through. So you've got this nice bed of color underneath your bulbs that are blooming above. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll put a link to the video of the bulb planting that I did, both in this container and in several containers. I did different methods of bulb planting in a few different containers. I'll put a link to that video in the description and at the end of this video if you guys would care to learn more and take a look at that as well. And then I have my pansies planted in ground along with my snapdragons, and I'll put a link to that video as well in the description and at the end of this video if you care to take a look at that one and planting in ground and in containers. As I mentioned earlier, I generally prefer to use the pansies more in the front yard because they do have that bigger bloom like you can see here rather than the violas, so you can see them from further away when you're walking up the front walkway and from the street. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm so excited to get the hanging baskets planted and adding Dusty Miller to the mix. I'm really excited about that. And y'all let me know in the comments if you've planted Dusty Miller and if you've had success with them being a perennial in your area, or if they've just worked as an annual for you. I'd be really interested to hear what you guys have experienced as well. Also, make sure to stay tuned. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be transitioning some of my containers to more of the holiday containers and moving out of the fall containers. Now, I will be saving a lot of the flowers that I've planted before, but then just adding some different elements to make them more holiday inspired and themed. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much again. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can be notified each time I upload a new video. All right, you guys, until next time, happy gardening and goodbye.